Panel, thanks very much indeed. Our first witness is Alan Mendoza, who's founder and executive director of the free market think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. How much do you think we are not responsible for his actions, but could have, should have stopped it getting to this stage?
Well, I think it's a complicated question, Michael, because, of course, we're talking about a whole period post-Cold War that's led to this point, essentially. I think you can probably divide it into three different periods. The first is the 1990s, when we took our eye off the ball. We all thought it was the end of history. We all thought, ideologically, we were going to win, come what may. We didn't need to worry about Russia. It didn't matter what they did, irrelevant. Then we move into the 2000s, when Putin takes over. And for some, it was obvious that this was not a good man from day one, but for others, they looked into his eyes and saw, someone they could do business with, and thought, okay, he may do things a bit differently to Yeltsin, say, but we get on with that. And finally, of course, you come to the period post-2008 when it's quite obvious that he is, kind of primarily responsible. So I think, and you ratchet up tension that way. So I think there was a mistake in the 90s. We started to get wise in the 2000s. We didn't get wise quick enough, and that's why we are where we are now.
Matthew Taylor?
I want to suggest that there are three things that have stopped us fighting against the enemies of our values: nationalism, profit, and political expediency. So if we could take those in turn. So by nationalism, I mean a view that
time.
But if you take, for example,
nationalism, which is really about
enthusiasm, solidarity, that's been part of the reason, isn't it?
No, I don't think that has been why, for example, Putin has emerged victorious. I think in reality the international community has been fairly united when it deigns to act on this subject. It's just that they haven't acted in the right way at the right time.
But if you take, for example, the enthusiasm of the previous Conservative administration for Chinese investment, any suggestion, well, hold on, this is making us dependent on an aggressive, anti-democratic regime, was simply dismissed. Because the argument was, yeah, but, it'll give us investment that we need. It's good for the country.
But that's the very opposite of nationalism, which is really about, Britain first.
No, but okay, but I'm using the term not in nationalism in an expansionary sense. I'm using it as a kind of national self-interest sense.
But countries are always self-interested, and the point about the international rules-based order is that is something many of us believe is in our national self-interest, and over time we have tried to prioritise that.
So it feels hard to act against rogue states if you're not willing to make national sacrifices. Then profit would be the second concern, because in the end, big business will take money from absolutely anybody, even if they've got blood on their hands, won't it?
I think on the profit side, there's clearly an argument for saying, let's not go against X and Y because it's bad for trade, it's bad for our businesses in that sense. And obviously governments are looking at employment, they're looking at those issues, and there is, of course, a relevance to that when you're considering these arguments.
And then finally, political expediency, because no leader who wants to win an election is going to say to people, I think you should make material sacrifices for the good of our values and international solidarity. And so I suppose the question is, if you give them the strength of this thing, national self-interest, business profit, political expediency, it's not surprising, is it, that in the end we don't look as though we're willing to fight these guys?
Well, I think the messaging has been poor on those scores, but at the same time, you've had constant voices saying something different throughout this time. It's never been necessarily the national consensus and X and Y things should happen. There are people who are pushing that argument, people pushing another argument, obviously based on the fact that values do matter, and who you do business with is as important as what you're doing business over.
Mona?
Coming back to this immediate crisis, we can't stop President Putin from pushing further unless we're really willing to engage in open military warfare. Because if we don't do that, it's just posturing, isn't it?
Well, it's not about open military warfare. I think there are many steps you can take short of open military warfare. The first thing you have to do is not allow him to dictate the pace of this campaign the whole way through. So far, we're just responding. Now, we are responding well on sanctions, but it's not enough. We need to actually...
But that's what I'm asking. Whether we have sanctions or anything else, what's actually going to stop him?
Well, what will ultimately stop him is dependent on how long this campaign is, basically. If he gets it over and done with in 2 weeks, that's obviously nothing's going to stop him. If he gets bogged down, however, that creates opportunities for us to intervene in various ways.
But that's what I'm asking you. How do we intervene?
So you can keep on ramping up the sanctions, sanction all the oligarchs, cut all the SWIFT banks out of SWIFT, etc. You can then...
And you know those are very complicated things. These are not easy things to do.
Let's just look at where we were a week ago to where we are today. It's unprecedented how we've moved so quickly on this, and we have sunk the ruble and the Russian stock market in a process there.
OK, so just moving away from this slightly, I mean, do you not think that we need a level of humility to find new ways of building alliances especially with the Russian people, and stop this ideological war of values which underpins so much political polarization?
Well, it's not so much the question of forging an alliance with the Russian people here. We are allied with the Russian people. The Russian people, by all accounts, want a choice in what they want to do. Navalny's popularity, for example, the opposition leader, is quite dramatic, and the reason he's in prison is because Putin dare not have a fair election, because he knows if he does, he will lose. So actually, we are in alliance with people. The mistake we've made, I think, is not prioritising that side of the argument enough as we've gone along and accepted a despotism.
We've heard a lot of rhetoric recently about freedom, but freedom, as you know, is never free, and it doesn't come about with thoughts and prayers. So what should be the ultimate price we're willing to pay?
Well, that will depend on the nature of the threat, of course.
But you said at the beginning that we shouldn't allow Putin to dictate. But if we're just waiting to see what he does next, aren't we just exactly allowing him to do that?
But Putin is the threat that we know about, and we know how far he's prepared to go. So from that perspective, we do have to raise the ante. Every now and again, a dictator comes along, and you have to do something unprecedented. We didn't want to act against Hitler in the 1930s. Ultimately, we realised we had no choice but to take the ultimate sacrifice because he wouldn't stop.
But Putin isn't a dictator who's just come along. He's been in power for over 20 years. We've known what he's like. We've known through Chechnya, through Estonia, through the annexation of the Crimea. So why did we not see this coming?
Well, I think some of us did see this coming. You're talking to one person who did. But you're right. Why did leaders not take this more seriously? And the reality was they didn't think that we would revert to 1930s-style military aggression of this kind. Yes, of course, he did it before in various places, but it was small salami tactics. What they didn't realise was that the salami led to the whole sausage being eaten.
Okay, Alan Mendoza, thank you very much indeed.